create deontic powers, and you use language to do that, but the powers that you create go beyond semantic powers. So all of Barack Obama's powers derive from semantics. He has to be created as president and treated as president, represented as president, but the powers go beyond semantics. The power to command American troops in battle goes far beyond the semantics, even though the initial origin of the power is on the basis of the semantics. The semantics creates powers that are not semantic. So it turns out that language is not only the fundamental human social institution, the one that all others derive from, all others depend on, but it's fundamentally different in its operation, because it just as far as the meanings of the sentences are concerned, all you have when you know the language is the power to perform speech acts with those sentences. But when you're locked into a system of institutional facts and status functions and deontic powers, when you're buying and selling stocks on the stock market, or you're passing legislation in Congress, or you're a judge adjudicating cases, all of those cases involve the use of language, but they use language to create powers that go beyond language. Okay, how am I doing for time? Well, maybe I'll try and summarize so we'll have plenty of time for discussion. Now, there are a few things I want to say of a theoretical kind before I throw it open for discussion. One is, it seems to me if you think along these lines, as I'm suggesting, you get a different conception of many traditional questions in the social science, in the social sciences and in political philosophy. If you look at our tradition in political and social theory, there is an endemic flaw that goes back to the Greeks, and that is, roughly speaking, they had an impoverished theory of language. They took language for granted. The social contract theorists are the worst because they assume that we're running around the woods speaking a language, and then some genius says, let's make a social contract. And then you get together and have a society. But what the implication of what I'm saying is, if you've got a language, you've already got an implicit social contract, because you have the possibility of creating a status functions. Now, how do we get away with it? You see, what's amazing is we get away with it. And the short answer to that is, you get away with it if people accept it. And the most amazing creation of a status function by declaration were by guys who wrote as if they had read my book. They use the very terminology. They call it the Declaration of Independence. Now there's nothing, you see, there's nothing in their status functions prior to that moment that gives them the power to do this. These are, let us not forget, British subjects. They're not citizens of anything. They're subjects of King George III, where? In a British crown colony. Philadelphia, it's a crown colony. It's got a status function. It's entirely under the government of the royal family in London, and they just got together and performed a collective speech act. They said, we declare ourselves to be an independent nation. Now, they got away with it. How did they get away with it? Well, the short answer is they got people to accept it. And we're here because people accept it and we accept it. The long answer is they had to fight a war to get the acceptance. And it wasn't really until Cornwallis was defeated at Yorktown that they were free and clear. And by the way, something Americans tend to forget, we couldn't have won the war without the help of the French. The French were essential in the creation of our country. So remember that when the French complain about us and we complain about them, which is a common domestic conversation. So here are these guys who created an institutional reality of enormous power. However, it doesn't always work. A bunch of people, I guess, in Richmond tried to do the same stunt. You know, they had a good model. They created the Confederate States of America, and it didn't work. They did not, again, it took a war to settle the issue, but the issue was settled. But the remarkable thing is that your life is entirely structured within a series of complex families of status functions.
They're all created by the same simple logical linguistic operation applied over and over, the status function declaration. See, we're not smart enough to do something new and original every time. We have this device for creating status functions. It's the status function declaration, and we apply it over and over. Now, I think, as I said, a lot of traditional issues are clarified if you adopt the approach that's implicit in what I've been saying. Let me conclude with one thought. There are huge debates that go on in this country and internationally about human rights, about universal human rights. The question is, what is the ontology of the human rights? And there are a class of philosophers who are very skeptical, like Jeremy Bentham and Alistair McIntyre. They think talk of human rights is nonsense. What are you talking about? But I think, in fact, the talk can be made legitimate once you recognize what's actually going on. You don't have human rights the way you have thumbs. The human right is a status function. What's different about human rights and other rights is that other rights typically arise within a pre-existing institution. As a citizen, I have certain rights. As a husband, I have certain rights. As a professor, I have certain rights. But somebody in the 18th century, I don't know who it was, or maybe it was 17th century, but it's in the Enlightenment, somebody or some group of people got an idea of genius. Just being a human being is a Y status function. They didn't have the right terminology for saying that, but that's what they were trying to say. Just being a human being is a Y status function, and as such, it carries deontic powers. It carries universal human rights. And I think that can be made intellectually legitimate. Once you recognize that human rights are universal status functions created and maintained by a certain type of speech act, and that speech act is the status function declaration. Now, another claim I haven't really had time to develop is that the institutional facts are not only created in their initial form by the status function declaration, but that's how they're maintained over a period of time. You maintain the system in power by constantly representing it as the power structure that it is. One of the ways to see this is to see the way that revolutionary movements want to change the vocabulary. At the time of the Russian Revolution, the revolutionaries were very anxious that people not use the traditional forms of address of traditional Russia. They wanted everybody to be called comrade. Why? Because that marked an equality of status function, which calling somebody a lord or a duke or whatever would not accept. So they were insistent on changing the vocabulary. And more recently, the feminists in the early days of feminism were anxious that we not use the traditional vocabulary of ladies and gentlemen, because that marked status functions that they were anxious to overcome. Now, I don't know how these things develop. It's quite interesting. If you, and somebody in Moscow today, I think if you address them as comrade, it'll be a joke. I mean, because the system that was created that has become undermined. But even this is going on as we speak. If you look at older American laws, the word spinster occurs commonly. Now, I once asked my class, how many of you are spinsters? Please raise your hand. One middle-aged woman had a courage to raise her hand. I wanted to give her an A on the spot. Because this is a term that is becoming obsolete. It did mark a status function, and I think bachelor may be becoming obsolete, what with a change in what with hesitation I call marital practices. But with the relation of the sexes, we may be going for all sorts of new vocabularies. But the vocabulary is crucial because the vocabulary is the articulation of the assignment of a status function. So I think that I have only really begun a subject, but what I want to suggest, and I'll conclude with this, is that when I use this somewhat provocative title, The Logical Structure of Human Civilization, unfortunately, most people think I mean logical as opposed to illogical. That's not the point. The point is that it has a propositional structure. The propositional structure is the assignment of a status function according to the Speech Act of Declaration that makes something the case by representing it as being the case. And wherever you have propositional structures, you have logical relations. That's why I call it the logical structure of human civilization. But this, I think, is how we differ from other social animals. There are lots of social animals, lots of them have power structures and hierarchies where there are alpha males and alpha females, but they do not have this remarkably rich, stable system of status functions that we have. I visited Mike Tomasello at his primate lab in Leipzig, and he's got all these primates that are busy fighting it out every day. Who's going to be the alpha male today? And the alpha male has to find allies among other males to fight off other alpha males. Now, that's not how it works in the White House. Barack Obama does not get up and think, today I gotta beat everybody in arm wrestling or whatever it might be. No, he's got an accepted system of status functions, and that persists through time. And this is a feature both of good institutions and bad institutions, but I'm convinced that it is the key to understanding the ontology of human civilization. Thank you. Okay, guy on the left.
I have a question. Would that question be in one of those categories or
Questions are, I didn't give you a lecture on speech acts. Questions are a species of directive. Every question is a request. It's a request for an answer. And indeed, there's a remarkable thing about questions in English, that the form of the question determines the form of the answer. So if I answer, do you have any bananas? And you say yes, that doesn't mean yes, it's going to rain tomorrow. It means yes, we have bananas. And the one exception to this is the peculiar English modal auxiliary verb. So if I ask you, shall I marry a Republican? The correct answer is not yes, you shall, or no, you shall not, but rather yes, do, or no, don't. It asks for advice. But the modal auxiliaries are hard to think about anyway. But go ahead. Questions are directives. Yes.
That sort of was my question.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well,
I was kind of thinking in the sense of anything from satisfying curiosity to questioning authority, like,
yeah.
Who do you think you are? What do you think
Yeah.
you're doing?
Okay, now, I resist the temptation to give a lecture on questions. They're a fascinating subject. And one interesting class are rhetorical questions. When the guy in the Republican National Convention says, do we want 4 more years of incompetent government? He doesn't want people to think about it and think, oh, I don't know, do we or don't we? I guess we do. No, it's not the form of the question. So rhetorical questions are interesting in that the rhetorical question makes a statement by assuming that the answer to the question is known. It's assumed the answer is known. Consequently, you use the rhetorical question to make a statement. So questions are fascinating, a lot to be said. But in any case, the short answer is real honest-to-John questions like, how do I find my way to Bloomington? That is a directive where you're asking for information. Yes. Oh, no. Yeah, let's guy over here first, and then we'll come back to you. Yeah.
I agree with most of what you say, but I want to draw...
Watch out when somebody says that, because he's now going to tell us what he disagrees with.
I want to draw attention to an important fact. Namely, you, for example, have a California driving license.
Yeah.
Now, suppose I were visiting California, I didn't bring my driver's license. You couldn't say, Rohit, that's all right, just take mine.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I have also a lunch coupon for lunch tomorrow.
Yeah.
I could give that coupon to somebody else.
Yeah.
And that person could eat lunch instead of me. So it's important that the driver's license is unique to you.
Yeah.
And when a policeman stops you, he wants to know that it's John Searle
Yes.
who was speeding and
Yeah.
not Kirk Ludwig. Whereas on the other hand, when it comes to lunch, it doesn't matter who is
Yeah.
eating the lunch, because they want to make sure that the number of coupons equals the number of people who pay.
Yes. No,
So there are some important properties about these certificates of power.
no, that's absolutely right, and I'm grateful for the contribution. I want to say a little bit more about it. Many status function attached to specific individuals, named individuals. So you're named in the driver's license or on the marriage license. You can't prove you're married by borrowing my marriage license, okay? I mean, it is specific. The beauty of money is it's fungible. Anybody with the money can use it to buy something with. But all sorts of other things are not in that way exchangeable. Now, there's another topic I didn't have a chance to go into, but I want to use this occasion to mention it, and that is that often we need indicators. You need status function indicators. So the policeman wears a uniform, and the actual license that I have is not the status function. It's an indicator that I am able to drive. It's what I call a status function indicator. And these wedding rings, uniforms, driver's licenses, all of these are status function indicators, and their primary function is epistemic. They prove that I have the status that I claim to have. Now, they can acquire a kind of life of their own. So the driver's license in California is used for all kinds of things that have nothing to do with driving. You can't buy a beer if you haven't got a driver's license, because you can't prove that you're over 21. And so sometimes the status indicators will acquire a kind of separate life of their own. But the basic idea is that for many status functions, you need to indicate that you have the status function by some epistemic device. When I first got to Berkeley, you could tell who the professors were. They were the guys with ties on, ties and jackets. Then in the 60s, you could tell the professors, they were the ones with shoes on, because dressing habits had changed by then. So you get these, and part of the problem in my old university, Oxford, is that when I was a student there, you could identify who was a member of the university by their clothing. They wore, well, the kind of stuff I got on, roughly speaking. They had on worsted flannel slacks and usually tweed jackets. This wouldn't qualify, but in any case, there was no question about improper people wandering in the university. They would be immediately identified by their style of dress. Now, everybody wears blue jeans. They imitate the Americans. So you can't do that anymore, and people have now started locking their doors. You have to lock your door in Oxford the way you didn't used to, because it was all members of the upper class, and they were readily identifiable by their dress. Okay, wait, did you finish? Yeah, I'm sorry. Thanks for the question. Okay, you're on.
In the beginning of your talk, you talked about physical particles like protons and electrons.
Yeah.
But you haven't said a word about how you get from protons and electrons to human beings or to civilization.
Okay, let me answer that question. Unfortunately, I only had 2 lectures to give here. One was about consciousness. So let me give you the short answer. To begin with, I'm not sure they're particles. Maybe points of mass energy or strings, but that's not what I'm paying the physicists to do, to settle on the basic, the ontology of the basic entities. Okay, those are organized into systems. Now, on our little Earth, some of those particles are organized into large molecules containing lots of carbon with hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. And some of those systems of carbon-based molecules became alive. Now, to this day, we don't know when and how and where that happened, but it did happen. It's an amazing fact. And some of those living organic systems, continue to evolve, and we're now talking about millions of years, continue to evolve until they became animals. And some animals evolved consciousness. And now that's what I talked about last time, is how the brain creates consciousness. And we still don't understand that. We don't know how exactly the brain creates consciousness or how exactly it functions in the brain, but we know that it does. Now, this lecture was the next step, where once you've got consciousness, then you can get language. And I didn't discuss the structures of language, I just talked about some of the uses. And now once you have language, you have the possibility of creating society, human and human civilization. So the pattern goes from the basic physical reality of physical particles to the beginnings of life in carbon-based molecules, and then the development of life through evolution, and then the development of evolutionary mechanisms through the development of animals, and conscious animals, and then the development of language, and then us, and then all of the stuff we got. That's the picture. I should have spelled that out, but that's how you get from protons to presidents. You get from having the basic system of the physical particles, some of those become alive, a stunning fact, and some of those living systems evolve over long periods of evolutionary time, and then over that long period of time, you eventually reach folks like us. Now, we ought not to be arrogant about our special situation. As I mentioned before, we are a very small solar system in a big galaxy, and there are 100 billion stars in our galaxy. I don't know how many of them can support life or planets like as ours do. But our galaxy, with its 100 billion stars, it's one of 100 billion galaxies. So it seems to me unlikely that we're the only conscious.
Thank you, John Searle. The Logical Structure of Human Civilization, John Searle, from 4 years ago today on Philosophy Overdose. Right now it has 309,331 views.